The certified letter on my doormat at 4:19 a.m. said the line of credit on our bungalow was now in the final draw stage, and the title company thanked me for my signature. The letter had a copy of that signature in blue ballprint, curved exactly like mine, and a notary stamp from a UPS store halfway across Asheville on a date when I could prove I was wheeling my mother-in-law out of Mission Hospital after a biopsy. I carried the papers to the kitchen, set them on the butcher block island beside the half-eaten container of strawberries my daughter had left out, and realized I was reading the collapse of my life before sunrise. I did the practical things first, the things any maintenance-layered kind of man does because actions keep thoughts at bay. I took photos of each page, the embossed notary, the typed Riverview title, the reference number with its neat block letters, the exact timestamp in the footer 15/2/19. I forwarded everything to my earned email and the joint account, then logged into Truist and saw the equity line listed in my name with a balance that made my ribs ache. I screenshot it again. I set a kettle on the stove and kept my hands busy, rinsing the evidence of strawberries, stacking plates, tracing the nicked edge of the cutting board where our old neighbour once dropped a knife in a way that had seemed dramatic at the time. The kettle shrilled. My phone vibrated with a fraud alert that was late to the party. By the time my wife, Lena, padded in with her hair in the elastic she kept around her wrist, I had brewed coffee, put a bowl of cereal in front of our 7-year-old, and written out, in black Sharpie on an index card, 3 crisp steps: call the title company at 8, freeze the line, file a police report. I told myself I would present these like a steady hand, not a trembling fist. I tried to think like someone who believed there might be a reasonable explanation for a forged loan. Asheville has this way of pretending it is small west side porches, dogs that know one another, barristers who remember your kid's name, and then, all at once, it becomes a lattice of strangers. We moved to a 2-bedroom bungalow off Haywood Road when our daughter was in preschool. The house had a low slung porch with a swing that squeaked like a small animal when the weather was damp, a narrow hallway leading to a tiny bedroom that we painted a cheerful yellow, and floors that were sanded smooth by my own hands after work. My day job was maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized apartment complex in South Slope, which meant I knew the city in a practical way, which streets flooded after a half-hour of summer rain, which alleys collected mattresses after move-out day, which hardware stores carried the one kind of wax ring that fit older toilets. I also ran a little e-commerce side hustle, reselling refurbished tools, odd lots of tile, discontinued fixtures. It helped when medical bills hit. It helped in a way that never felt like it would be enough forever. Lena worked as a crisis counselor for a non-profit that handled domestic violence hotlines for 3 counties. The schedule was supposed to be predictable, but never was. The shifts, the on-call nights, the sudden coverage when someone got stuck in Hendersonville and needed to hand over a case. Her job put her in the blast radius of other people's chaos. Our home was meant to be the quiet place it all bounced off of. We sometimes succeeded. We sometimes failed. When our mother found a lump, when the biopsy got scheduled, when our daughter's pediatrician insisted on a second inhaler for late summer asthma spikes and the copay felt like a tax on breathing, we managed by not thinking too hard about the long-term math. We were, I told myself, one of those solid middle-class families who were always a little behind because being alive was expensive. The first red flag slid into our life as something pleasant. Lena changed her shampoo. She smelled like sandalwood and amber and incense when she slid under the covers on nights she claimed she had been stuck at the office debriefing a hotline call. The second flag was less poetic. The Ring Video Doorbell Pro 2 we installed after a rash of porch pirates went dark. No motion events for hours, in windows of time that matched the lengths of her debriefs. The app would report a firmware update, then nothing but silence. The third came in small, deniable ways. $20 bills missing from the envelope we kept for groceries, a new passcode on her phone, explained as a privacy measure because of work, an odd uptick in the car's mileage, easily attributed to extra trips across town, if one wanted to be generous. I kept choosing generosity until generosity started to feel like anemia. I remember a Tuesday at the beginning of summer when the pantry door would not close because our daughter had hung a crayon calendar with tape. God bless it, and the humidity had swollen the wood. I planed a sliver off the edge, work shirt already damp with the heat, and noticed the calendar Lena had scribbled in pencil was not quite right. She had marked a night shift on a night her supervisor later posted a team photo at a fundraising gala. I recognized the brick wall at the event space near the river. We had gone there once for a wedding and danced beside a rented neon sign that said "Better Together." Lena could have been excused to easily work over party, but she looked incredible in that photo. The dress she had hid in the back of the closet, the same sandalwood light circling her. I asked her about it over a late dinner of leftover roast chicken. She explained she had gone to show her face and then left for the hotline centre, a hand-off, a night spent under fluorescent lamp. I wanted to be the man who believed her without swallowing glass. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I was patient. Maybe I wanted the world to make sense. The UPS store identified in the notary stamp did not open until 8. When I called, the woman on the phone said they had 3 notaries, all commissioned, and that they would not discuss a client's documents without a subpoena. Riverview title, when I called, was more helpful. A man with a tired voice told me the account had been set up by a mortgage broker out of Charlotte, and he sent me to PDS the application with the typed fields, and a scan of an in-person signing at the pop-up desk in the corner of a plant shop on North Lexington Avenue, the kind of quirky place that sells their plants in mugs with sarcastic sayings. The plaintiff in the document was my full legal name, the tax parcel was our bungalow's, and the pen that scrawled my signature ended in a flourish I had been taught by a shop teacher in 9th grade who thought signatures should look like flags. The notary instruction sheet included the name of the notary, an address, and a number to call if there were discrepancies. I called the number, left a measured message meant to appeal to the procedural part of anyone's brain, and then drove to the police station on Haywood Street with a file folder tucked under my arm. I gave a statement to an officer with kind eyes who typed slowly and asked me if there was any reason someone close to me would have access to my identification documents. I said the reason would have to be that we were married. I left with the case number APD-25-1984 and the impression that paperwork could be both ballast and boy. I then drove directly to Truist, told the branch manager I needed to freeze the line of credit immediately, and watched as she clicked with more urgency than her bland tone suggested. She printed a disclosure full of phrases like alleged fraud and investigative hold. When she asked if there were other joint accounts I might consider separating, I said yes, and I opened a personal checking account with a $100 bill I folded into a crisp rectangle as though that could make it multiply. The lie about the hillock would have been large enough to fill a year, but life is efficient about stacking torches. During a routine visit for our daughter's inhaler refill the following week, a pediatrician's new nurse reviewed the chart and asked me to confirm that I was the biological father. She tapped the screen with a nail that clicked in small, irritating pics and read aloud that my blood type on file was O negative and our daughter's was AB positive. She then said she did not mean anything by it except that the new software flagged blood type combinations sometimes, and she asked if we wanted genetic counselling in the abstract way people promote brochures. I said we were fine, and I watched my daughter demonstrate a puff and hold breath into the spacer the way she had done since she was 4. The rest of the day I carried the thought like a bag of wet laundry, heavier than it looked from the outside, unglamorous, sloppy around the edges. The next morning, I signed up for a laboratory place on Merriman Avenue that advertised fast results and paid for a basic EBO test in cash. 2 days later, a woman at the desk printed my results and handed them to me. O negative, just like the pediatric chart had claimed. I folded the paper and slid it under the mat on my truck's passenger seat and told myself I would not spiral. I had been taught by life to destroy spirals. Still, I bought a pocket-sized spiral notebook at the Ingles on Sand Hill Road and began to log things. If I drove the Civic that day, I recorded the odometer at the start and end. If the ring app went dark from 8:13 to 11:27 p.m., I noted it. If Lena asked me to buy groceries and I took $40 from the envelope, I wrote it down. When a new $5 recurring charge appeared on our joint credit card under a merchant called River House Studios, I added a line that said, "Coworking, check it." When I found a crisp receipt in the glove box from a gas station on Brevard Road at 1:12 a.m., during the night I had believed she was sleeping on the couch after a late call, I wrote the time and the dollar amount and the pump number in my neatest block letters. I told myself I was not a man who snoops. I told myself I was protecting the roof over my kid's bed. The first reveal felt definitive. It came in a shallow unit at Store Safegarden on a Friday afternoon when the heat made the asphalt smell like burnt sugar. Lena had left the house with the claim of a long shift and a promise of donuts in the morning to make up for missing our daughter's soccer scrimmage. Her absence was the only window long enough to do anything that felt like investigating without tipping into obsession. The storage code on a post-it in her wallet opened Unit C-13 with a thin roll-up door that rattled like a chain. There were 5 labelled bins, a garment rack with 2 garments bags, a pelican case I recognized from our last beach trip, and a monthly lease agreement taped inside the door with the name of the main lessee blocked out by black marker and an authorized user listed as Al Harper. It could have been a seasonal closet. It could have been a graveyard for normal things. I opened the Pelican case because I am a man who knows how to open things built to look sealed. Inside were a prepaid phone in its box, a folder labelled with a handwriting that was not Lena's and not mine, and an envelope that felt thick. The folder contained a sublease agreement for Apt 3B at a brick building on Hilliard Avenue, dated 3 months ago, with the rent payment schedule and a Venmo handle I did not recognize. The main tenant listed was a name I did recognize, Marco Ruiz, one of the maintenance techs at my complex, the one who once gave our daughter a stack of stickers and always asked about her soccer with a sincerity that made me grateful. The authorized occupant listed in a smaller font was L. Harper. The envelope contained a series of receipts, a down payment to Riverview Title, a jeweler's invoice for a comfort fit band and a thin stacking ring, a dry cleaning tag from a shop on Merriman that pressed the dress she had worn to that gala. The prepaid phone had never been activated. I stood there and told myself I was seeing what could be explained if I allowed story to do its work. Marco had recently moved out of a rented house with 3 guys and into a studio near downtown. Maybe he had used Lena's help to sublease temporarily while he waited for his name to go on the main lease. The ring could have been a replacement wedding band for me, although the size on the invoice was too small. The title receipt could have been a deposit for a refinance we had discussed and dismissed when rates climbed. My brain built tinker-toy explanations as my gut sagged. I took photos of everything and relocked the unit and drove home on autopilot. When Lena stumbled in the next morning with a pink box of donuts and a tight smile, she announced that the shift had been awful. She collapsed on the couch and fell asleep with the sandalwood still on her skin. I wanted to shake her awake and lay the evidence out like a map. I wanted to protect our daughter from the sight of 2 people tearing their life like a damp paper bag. I filled a thermos with coffee and took our kid to soccer with a chair under my arm, clapping at her better than average in step while the clear mountain sun made the parents squint. I kept one eye on the time and imagined a clock over my house. The second reveal undermined the first in a way that would have been darkly funny if I had not been in it. I brought up the sublease to Marco at work on Monday. He had a habit of kidding that could tip into avoidance, but when I mentioned Hilliard Avenue, his face fell into a kind of flustered panic. He said it was not what it looked like, which is exactly the thing one says when it is what it looks like. And then he motioned toward the laundry room where the hum of machines made private sentences possible without words. He said he had rented a studio there for a short term because his house was being gutted by a landlord eager to raise the rent, and Lena had co-signed because he had thin credit. He said he should have told me because he liked me and hated me feeling blindsided. He said he would write a letter that explained her role and that he had records of his rent payments if that were to help. He said he knew how it sounded. He said he did not want me to think the wrong thing about a woman who had once, in his words, saved his sister's friend's life with a phone call. He said he could not prove that part. I watched his black work circling to the small of his back and tried to decide whether he was earnest or rehearsed. That night I went to the building on Hilliard Avenue and sat in my truck and watched, because there is a thin line between due diligence and stalking, and men like me do not always see it in time. A woman in a yellow raincoat came and went with a tote bag. A guy in a purple hoodie smoked on the steps and argued into his phone, and he had the exhausted look of someone who ran a restaurant. A kid carried a laundry basket down the stairs and dropped a sock, and a woman poked her head out and scolded him in a way that sounded normal even from a distance. At 10:36 p.m., Lena walked up the steps carrying a brown paper bag with our favourite Takeouts logo and then came back down empty-handed at 10:54 p.m. Hair in the elastic she kept around her wrist, sandals clicking on the stone. The ring app's timeline that night had gone blank from 10:29 to 11:17 p.m. I did not sleep much. I did not arrive anywhere useful. Money began to tighten its grip, as money does at precisely the wrong moments. The first hospital bill for Lena's mother's surgery showed a balance after insurance that was technically payable over time but felt psychologically like a deadline stamped on our kitchen table. The equity line sat frozen on an investigative hold while the title company and the bank flagged their own internal fraud processes with polite emails that thanked me for my patience. Our joint checking account's balance dwindled to the number you see when you know you will have to choose between gas and something you used to call normal in nicer seasons. A merchant on my e-commerce business charged back 2 drills I had shipped when the buyer claimed he had never ordered them. The dispute would take a month. The car needed brakes, and I bought the parts and installed them myself on a Thursday after work, kneeling on cardboard under the Civic while our daughter bounced on the porch swing and told me about a drawing she had made that day of a bluebird nest. As if to pivot from money to biology with cruel efficiency, I called the paediatrician to inquire about the blood type discrepancy, and the receptionist transferred me to a nurse who explained with unusual politeness that the AB in the file belonged to a different child with the same first and last name, and that our actual record showed a positive, which meant I could breathe because genetics would bend that way. She apologized for the software mistake and typed a note in the chart. I asked if she could send a corrected summary to our patient portal, and she said she would. When I hung up, my hands were shaking in a way that would have annoyed a younger version of me who believed in a steadier version of manhood. Stability can become a fetish. I held it like a relic and walked into a public scene because it felt like the right time to force clarity. It was a Sunday afternoon at Riverside Fellowship, a small church off Patton Avenue that doubled as a community centre. We had started going when our daughter was invited by a classmate to a potluck. We stayed because the potluck had casseroles that tasted like neighbourliness and because the choir wobbled in a way that made you forgive people for everything. That afternoon there was a pancake fundraiser for the youth programme, and Lena's mother was there in a floral scarf, and Lena's sister had brought her 2 boys, and a web of people had constructed a social safety net that could become a trampoline or a snare depending on the tension. I brought a manila envelope. I told myself I would present facts and let them stand. I did not make a speech or a scene because I am not built for that kind of theatre. I took Lena aside near the bulletin board where announcements about camp-food drives and free legal clinics were pinned. I said I needed her to come with me into the office because I had to show her something important. She made a face that said not here and not now. Then she looked at my hands and realized I was not going to let this wait. The church office smelled like toner and lemon oil. I closed the door and laid the papers out like a hand someone would fold. I showed her the notary stamp from the UPS store on patent, the Riverview title acknowledgement, the bank letter frozen mid-investigation, the storeroom lease including her name as an authorized user, the Venmo screenshot showing money moving from her account to one that matched the sublease. I showed her the ring event gaps printed in columns with their timestamps. I showed her the odometer notes. I showed her the statement with River House Studios flagged and the note I had written to myself asking whether this charge made sense in a life like ours. I did not accuse. I did not demand a confession to match the word I had written at the top of a blank page in the days leading up to this. I asked the kind of process question that feels harmless until you watch your spouse's face become a mask and then a landscape and then a plea. She told me she could explain everything if I would let her speak without jumping in. She told me I had become suspicious in a way that did not feel like me. She told me I was reading her life as though I were a detective and not a partner. She told me the storage unit was about her mother's medical supplies and some outdated files she could not keep at work without violating policies. She told me the Venmo belonged to an assistant at a crisis shelter who had a privacy concern. She told me Hilliard Avenue had been a hand-up to a friend, and that friend had been Marco, and I could ask him. She told me the title document had been a refinance attempt she had initiated because she believed it would lower up payments and the notary had gotten the date wrong. She told me the River House Studios charges were for a shared desk where she met clients who had no safe home. She told me I had started treating her like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be trusted. I let her speak because I am not a man who likes the sound of his own voice in closed rooms. I looked at her mother's scarf outside the office window like a floral boy. I noticed one of the youth pastors watching us with the mild concern of a man who had seen enough marriages to know when a simmer threatened to boil. I told Lena I needed an independent confirmation on at least one piece because some of what she said could coexist with some of what I had, and some could not. I asked her if she would consent to a call with her supervisor in my presence to confirm her ships on the nights the ring had gone dark. She said I was trying to catch her, and the word catch made me think of a trap and a net and the way we used to laugh at word games on long drives. When we walked back into the fellowship hall, I had the edges of my papers in my hand, and people looked away out of politeness and curiosity, the way communities do when they smell a small fire. Lena's sister asked if everything was okay, and I told her I was dealing with a financial issue and we would handle it. Lena's mother put a gentle hand on my arm and said something I could not quite hear over the sizzle of pancakes on the griddle. Lena stood beside me, her face fierce and then smooth, and people watched us as though we were a painting that kept shifting. I pulled my daughter into my chest and breathed into her hair and then let her go back to the craft table where she was drawing birds with a volunteer who had the patience of a saint. A man from the church's tax clinic, whose name tag said Ken, asked if I wanted to set up an appointment to talk about home equity lines. I told him Monday would work. I left with an appointment time written in pen on the back of a flyer and a row of eyes in my peripheral vision. The third reveal came at the appointment. Ken was a retired accountant who volunteered twice a week at the church's small legal and tax clinic. He wore a rumpled khaki shirt and had a habit of tapping his pen on the table when he thought. He had me sign a release that allowed him to call the bank with me present and listen in. The branch escalated the call to their fraud department, and an investigator read from a script about their efforts to protect consumers and then got down to specifics because Ken knew what words to use. The investigator said the application had been initiated from an IP address at our house or our own internet, and the two-factor authentication code had been sent to a number ending in 41, which matched the last 2 digits of Lena's firm. The in-person signing had been validated by a notary whose license number we now knew, and the ID presented had been a North Carolina driver's license with my number and, at least according to the scanned image, my face. The investigator said they would work with law enforcement. He named my case number from the police report like a roll call. He then said that if someone in my household had committed fraud, the bank would require a different kind of affidavit and a different kind of prosecution. He used words like family member fraud and complicating factors. Ken tapped his pen in a slower rhythm after the call. He said I should consider closing any auto payments linked to joint accounts immediately and moving essential bills to the personal checking account I had opened. He said it would be wise to freeze my credit at all 3 bureaus. He said a lawyer would make sense sooner rather than later. He handed me a printed list of steps and asked me to initial beside each one, not as a legal document but as a way to make my brain take them seriously. He wrote a referral to a small firm downtown that handled both family law and financial crimes with the same dispassionate vocabulary. I left feeling like my life was a ledger that needed balancing. When I got home, Lena had left a note under the salt shaker that said she had been called in to cover an evening shift. The ring app logged her leaving at 4:48 p.m. The blue halo on the device was soothing and mocking in equal measure. I drove to the address for River House Studios and discovered it was exactly what the name promised. An airy room with rented desks near the river, succulents in little pots, a chalkboard announcing mindfulness workshops and a list of $5 snacks. A woman with short hair who smelled like eucalyptus told me that they required key fobs for after-hours access and that they could not disclose a member's schedule but that I could reach the community manager by email if I had a billing question. I took the card and stood for a moment on the path by the water and wondered when my life had turned into a list of service providers and case numbers. The fourth reveal arrived not from a phone call but from a knock. Our neighbour, Mr. Patel, who owned 2 duplexes on our street and had an analog camera pointed at his driveway because people kept trying to park in it, came by with a USB thumb drive and the kind of embarrassment that belongs to those who know a neighbour is about to see something that will bruise and bleed. He said his camera had caught the front of our house in a sliver of its field of view, and that on 2 nights when I had asked him if he had seen anything unusual because our ring had gone silent, his camera had recorded a person lowering our breaker at the exterior panel and then walking along the side yard to the spot under our bedroom window. He did not say who the person was because he did not have to. He said he did not want to be in our business, but that he knew what it was to have someone write your life without asking. He said witnessing mattered sometimes, even when it hurt. He put the USB in my hand like an accountability coin and asked about my daughter's socket with a little hitch in his voice. I watched the footage on my laptop in the quiet house. The grainy image showed the driveway, the streetlight beyond, and a sliver of our porch. At 10:31 p.m., Lena's silhouette crossed the frame. She wore a hoodie and moved with the familiarity of someone doing a practice thing. Her hand paused at the breaker box, and then the side yard went dark, a rectangle of silence on a screen. Movement later suggested she had unlatched the window screen from inside, the little trick you can do if you know how. She returned to the breaker box at 11:12 p.m., flipped it back, checked her phone, and walked off camera. The ring app's blackout matched the interval with infuriating beauty. The sync made my stomach clench. I saved the video and added it to my folder. I emailed myself a copy and then copied it to 2 separate thumb drives because redundancy whispers comfort. I printed stills like a hobbyist with a darkroom and wrote the time stamps in pencil beneath each one. I made a list of other images they were not evidence of where she had gone once she lowered the breaker. They were not proof that the Hellock had been signed that day. They were not outside interpretation of a face because the footage did not zoom enough. But I also made a list of what they were. A visible, Independent confirmation from a neutral source that the ring's convenient outages were engineered, a steady contradiction to the claim that these nights were spent working at the hotline centre, a map of choices. I took all of it to the lawyer the next morning. The firm had 2 names on the door, and the quiet of a place where people assume their voices will matter if they pay the retainer. The associate assigned to me had a neat haircut and the kind of tie that telegraphed restraint. He asked me to lay out the timeline and to number the exhibits. He asked if there were children. When I said yes, he wrote that word on the top of his legal pad. He told me to get a separate credit card in my own name and to freeze the joint card and the joint checking so that charges would bounce and then light up like warring flares. He wrote a letter while I sat there, requesting from the bank a copy of the in-person signing footage if any existed and a chain of custody record for the notary's stamp. He drafted a notice to the title company and a letter to the non-profit Lena worked for, not accusing, but requesting verification of her shift logs on the nights in question because custody and character intricately dance in front of judges who weigh things like steadiness and truth. He wrote a letter to Lena that was at once gentle and iron, a request to discuss a separation agreement, a proposed schedule for our daughter's time, a notice that a DNA test would be sought only if relevant and with dignity, a statement that any property taken or debt incurred without mutual consent would be considered in the division. He printed these out and slid them to me across the desk with sticky flags on the signature lines. As I signed, he told me something I knew but needed to hear. Family court would not be interested in adult consensual infidelity as much as in financial misconduct and the stability of a child's environment. He told me to be boring and complete. He told me not to yell. He told me stonewalling would be its own evidence. He gave me, as lawyers do, a language to stand inside, something sturdier than outrage. He then read me the case number the bank had assigned to my file TR-25FR-1118,309 and added it to the list of references that would stitch the paperwork together. Lena's supervisor returned my call while I was still parked outside the law office. The supervisor said she did not know the details of my situation and did not want to be in the middle of a marital dispute, but she would confirm what she could confirm. She said a review of the schedule indicated that on the dates I read aloud, Lena had not been on duty at the hotline centre, and that on 2 of those nights she had taken unpaid leave hours, and on 1 she had recorded administrative tasks at Riverhire Studios during daytime hours, not at night. She said this was not unusual in the aggregate, but patterns were patterns. She asked if there were a reason I needed this information beyond curiosity. I told her custody might be in play. She sighed in a way that made me imagine the weight she carried and said she would reply with an email that distilled only the factual confirmations. 20 minutes later, the email sat in my inbox like a level placed on a board. The bubble was not centered where it should have been. Independent confirmation changes how a person looks at a shared kitchen. I walked into the house and saw the tiny grease stain near the sink, the nick in the countertop we had each claimed the other had made, the stack of school flyers held by a bird magnet our daughter adored. I saw that nothing was fancy, and that some things were ours by the grace of weekends spent sanding and drilling, and that a line of credit had threatened to transform those edges into someone else's asset. I pulled the joint credit card out of my wallet and called to freeze it. I then opened a simple card in my name with a modest limit because I did not want to be tempted into fantasy buying as a form of self-soothing. I moved my direct deposit from the apartment complex to my new checking. I wrote an email to Lena's mother apologizing for any ripple but explaining that finances would be separate until further notice because of an investigation. I called the power company and confirmed that the bill could be transferred to my name without service interruption. I did the same with water. I changed the lock code on the back door. I wrote down the new code and taped it inside a kitchen cabinet for our babysitter so that no one could claim ignorance later. There is a specific humiliation in telling a babysitter, barely 20, that your marriage is under audit. I chose the pragmatic version. I told her I might leave a little earlier once in a while and that she should text me directly if anything felt off. I told her the door code had changed and that only she and I had the current one. I said this not to exclude my wife but to create a chain of custody for a lock. She nodded slowly, and then she told me something that dumped more salt in the stew. She said that on the previous Wednesday, when she had arrived, Lena had told her to keep my daughter in the backyard for a couple of hours to give her some quiet time, and that when she went inside to grab water, she had seen a man's work boots by the couch and 2 mugs in the sink that did not match any of ours in the usual rotation. She said she did not mean anything by it until now. She said she had not wanted to start something. She said she was telling me because I had asked her to text if anything felt off. She had been a witness without realizing it. Witnesses can be accidental and vital. I do not know how other people end things. I can only record how we staged ours because a stage is where things are seen. I waited until my daughter was at my sister's for an overnight and asked Lena to meet me at our dining table, which had been a Craigslist find and which I had reinforced with 2 spare brackets so it would not wobble. I had laid out 3 piles, the bank's letter and case number on the left, the storage unit photos and the sublease in the centre, and the email from her supervisor on the right. I had the USB with Mr. Patel's footage on a small plate like an offering. I had a written list of boundaries that read like rules on the wall of a swimming pool. I told her I was separating finances effective immediately and that I had already done so. I told her I would seek a temporary custody schedule that involved equal time and predictable handoffs with no overnight visits in any place I did not know. I told her I would not use the DNA test as a weapon, that I would only request one if compelled by legal strategy, and that I would not parade it in front of a child who did not ask to be in any of this. I told her I was retaining counsel and that any communication about money or property would go through that channel. I told her I had filed a police report, gave her the case number without flourish, and said I would give her the investigator's code if she wanted to make her own statement. I told her if she wanted to say that she had done the title work because she believed she was protecting the family from rising payments, I would not argue motive in this moment. I would only note that forgery undermines protection. I told her if there was someone else, I did not need his name for the purposes of court. I only needed her to understand that bringing him into our house while our babysitter was present and instructing our daughter to be in the backyard was a lapse in judgment that would inform how I structured handoffs. I told her I would not yell, and I did not. She did not yell either. She cried in a controlled, almost professional way that I recognized from the debrief she used to do with me after long days, when she would lay out a case and then fold it like laundry. She said she had done the heloc to cover a mess that would have crushed us if it reached us directly. She said her cousin had been facing deportation because of a misquote date that was actually a clerical error, and she had taken an advance on the house to pay an attorney who moved quickly because there was a window. She said she had helped Marco with the lease because he had helped her cousin with odd jobs, and she owed him a steadiness she could not show in public because the non-profit's policies frowned on staff endorsing clients through financial entanglements. She said she had cut the ring because the woman she met with sometimes needed a place for an hour where no digital trace would exist, and she had been a fool to do that in our home, but the alternative had been cold benches and suspicious landlords. She said the boots belonged to a man who had been giving the cousin a ride, though Lena had asked him to sit inside because it was raining, and that she had been overly confident in her ability to keep personal and professional lines clean. She said all of this while my face did its own silent math. Each explanation was a shape that could fit in 2 ways, charitable and damning. An attorney for a cousin is not the cousin herself. A forged signature is still a forged signature, even in the service of good. A sublease is not inherently morally scabbed, but the omission dripped. Cutting the ring for clients broadened the circumference to include acts that had nothing to do with protection. If they did not occur, the window still pointed in a direction that did not include me. And somewhere in this too, there was the jeweller's receipt, which Lena did not mention. I did not mention it, either because I wanted to see what her story would include freely and what it would omit. In omissions we live. We had a cooling off weekend arranged by default because of schedules and because we needed to keep our daughter's life pinned to a corkboard that did not include 2 people sobbing in the hallway. Lena moved to her sister's for 2 nights. I slept on the couch one of those nights, not to punish myself, but because the bed had begun to feel like a place where someone should be asked to account for someone else. Our daughter noticed the quiet and drew another nest with another set of birds, and I taped it up and said out loud to no one that we were doing the thing in the most responsible way possible. The lawyer filed for a temporary order, and we met with a mediator in a beige room with a fake plant. We agreed to a schedule that had me driving my daughter to school on even weeks and picking her up on odd, and Lena doing the mirror image. We set a rule that no introductions to new romantic partners would occur for 6 months. We wrote these in a document that did not care about our hearts. 2 days later, the notary from the UPS store called me back. She said she had received my message and had made notes. She said she had a record of the signing at the plant shop, and that she could confirm the ID presented to have my name and photo, but she could not authenticate body and intention beyond the scam. She said she remembered the woman who accompanied the signer because the woman had worn a floral scarf, and the notary had complimented it. The scarf matched the one Lena's mother wore every Sunday to church because it had been a gift from her late sister and because it covered the scar on her neck in a way that made her feel less observed. The image of the scarf in the notary's memory pried apart an explanation I had been nursing in the corner like a pet. Lena's mother could have been an unwitting witness. She could have thought she was at the finance. Or she could have been a witting one, cross-hatching love and loyalty in a way that helped me and hurt me in a single line. When I asked the notary if she would be willing to give a statement in person if asked, she said she would be subpoenaed. She then volunteered that she had written down the last 4 digits of the phone number used to confirm the 2-factor code in her log, and she read them to me. They matched Lena's number. My heart did nothing dramatic. It did the opposite. It settled in a way that felt like tired truth. The bank investigator emailed the next afternoon to say they had flagged the file as suspected household fraud and would proceed with that protocol. Words can be a guillotine and a sedative. The cousin became real when the attorney's invoice surfaced in Lena's email because invoices are faithful historians. The law firm had an office near Pack Square and an associate who handled immigration cases. The invoice listed services for an imminent 246-day of removal request and an imminent 130 petition, fee payments that had been made via cashier's checks purchased at our bank. The dates aligned with the Hellock draws. There was a note in the invoice about a rushed country conditions report that the associate had prepared in the middle of one of the nights when the ring had gone dark. The prayer-like thought that I was trying to be quick to judgment dissolved and became the bitter tea that I had been slow to be told. I could honor the motive and still not sign off on the forgery. I could be the man who would have helped if asked. I could also be the man who was not asked, intentionally. We had our courtroom hallway moment because that is how these arcs go. A judge with a firm voice heard our temporary custody petition, glanced at the stack of exhibits like a person reading a weather report, and set a schedule that mirrored the one we had mediated with minor adjustments to hand-off times. She signed a protective order of a kind that was not dramatic, not the kind on TV, but a financial one that froze the Hellock during the pendency of the investigation. She looked at me only briefly, and in that look I experienced something like relief because the gaze was neutral and not pitying. Pity makes people defensive. Neutrality gives you a scaffolding to breathe. We then sat in a narrow stretch of hallway with brown carpet and a vending machine with twisted chips in the spiral. Lena watched her mother fold and unfold the floral scarf like a small blanket, and I watched Lena do the math in her own head. Her sister came to stand between us, not to mediate, but to form a human breakwater. She said she believed Lena had done what she had done because of her particular set of values that I knew by heart. She said those values had been misapplied. She said she wished Lena had told me. She said it in a way that made it her own sentence. There were other people in the hallway that day who looked like versions of us in different outfits. We were not special. That humbled me in a way that kept me from making speeches. On my own side of the public/private line, I made more boundaries that felt like the opposite of vengeance. I asked the non-profit to send me a letter confirming that there would be no more client interactions in our home or in any place that could confuse our daughter about boundaries. They sent a policy document with a passage highlighted in yellow and an apology for a sore strain that had led to earlier flexibility. I hired someone to move the ring's transformer inside so that lowering the exterior breaker would not affect it, a small engineering solution that made me feel clever for 3 minutes. I called the title company weekly until the woman in their office started to recognize my voice and told me the file would take the time it would take. I put more of my inventory in my online shop because money does not care about plot. I met with the pastor at Riverside Fellowship and told him I would be taking a break from Sunday mornings because I did not want to become a story whispered over paper cups of coffee. He nodded and said his own marriage had surviving scar tissue and that most marriages did unless they were made of glass. There is a question I keep circling that I will put bluntly because I am in a blunt season. Would you insist on a DNA test right now, even with the software error corrected, just to say you had answered every whisper? Or would you let that sleeping dog lie for child's peace when nothing in your bones suggests a false line? I could hear a chorus of reasonable people answer both ways. I chose not to press it, not because I'm timid, but because the medical correction and the dates and the math and the photos and the actual memory of what made a person felt sufficient. If you think I am a fool, you can hold that thought. I have held worse. The aftermath, as promised by every person who has ever written about aftermaths, was not tidy. The bank investigated and sent 2 letters 6 weeks apart. The first acknowledged receipt of my affidavit and the police case number and said they reserved their rights and mine. The second said the file had been moved to their internal legal division. There was a rumour that the notary would lose her commission. Then the rumour evaporated because rumours are bad sources. Lena's cousin's case found a fragile footing. The attorney managed to get a stay while the petition was reviewed. I paid one of the cashier's checks out of the frozen line in a legal manoeuvre that made me feel like I was paying for something I would have paid for fast, only with more paperwork stapled to my chest. Marco wrote the letter he had promised, showed me screen-grabbed proof of his rent payment history, and I emailed a PDF of his letter to my lawyer, who thanked me in a way that said this small justice mattered even if the larger picture had already become oil on water. Some nights, after my daughter fell asleep in her yellow room with the bird drawings and a cluster of books at her feet because she falls asleep mid-page, I would sit on the porch swing and listen to the late summer bugs and the occasional drunk couple ambling down the street after Hamilton's open mic night. The ring's blue halo would pulse when a car passed. The porch light had this way of humming when it had been on too long, and the hum felt like a living presence, annoyed but resigned. I would think of the plant shop on North Lexington where the paper said I had signed my name, the smell of potting soil and coffee, and anxiety. I would think of the notary's memory of the floral scarf, which was specific and not calculable. I would think of my daughter's inhaler on the kitchen island and the way her small chest rose and fell when the wheeze had been quelled and the medicine had widened the world inside her. You can love the person in front of you and still not let them keep the keys. That is the moral complexity I found myself writing on napkins while the kettle hissed. Lena said she would pay me back for any direct costs I had trapped. I said I would accept those checks and still not drop the police case because precedent mattered and because I did not want to teach my daughter that clear lines should blow when someone's heart is involved. I helped Lena move into a small apartment off Leicester Highway that had a ridiculous porch swing that faced a parking lot. We labelled bins like teammates and did not discuss the ring receipt, which stayed in my folder like a seed that might never sprout because the soil had been replaced with gravel. The jewelry store later emailed a coupon that I deleted. If I sound calm, do not mistake that for being okay. It was the kind of calm you wear the way people wear a coat on warm days because they cannot carry it, and they will be cold later. On the first Monday of the new school year, I walked my daughter to the bus stop with a travel mug of coffee in my hand and a folded printout of her new schedule in my back pocket. She asked why the week looked different, and I told her the truth in a sentence that did not require a diagram. Her mama and I were going to live in separate houses for a while to make the grown-up things less messy, and she would have 2 places to keep her best art. She nodded in a way that almost broke me and then asked if she could have 2 toothbrushes. I promised she could have 3. She drew a bird on the fogged window of the bus with her finger and then waved goodbye with the solemnity of a 7-year-old beginning something she could not yet name. That afternoon, I changed the ring alert tone from the default to a softer chime because I did not need adrenaline every time a package arrived. I set the device to record to the cloud into a small SD card in an interior hub because my brain had become a fire marshal for our porch. At 4:19 a.m. one morning weeks later, I woke to the soft chime and the blue circle blooming on the front door. I looked at the screen and saw nothing but a moth batting itself silly against the lens, the world distorted by the beating of a wing. I stood in the kitchen with the quiet letter of that first morning printed on my skull and a different letter in a folder on the counter. The blue light hummed for a moment and then stilled. I made coffee and watched steam rise like a small ghost. The house smelled like old wood and lemon oil. The porch swing, freshly oiled, did not squeak. For a brief moment, before the kettle steam thinned and the birds began their round, the house felt honest in a way it had not for a while. It sat there in the dark, recorded and unrecorded, and did not ask me to choose between knowing and loving. I chose anyway. And the choice was a kind of discipline, and the discipline was a kind of love. I'm not sure what you would have done. Would you have blown your life up with a heavier hand, reckoned every last coil of every last story, demanded a confession carved in stone? Or would you, as I did, inventory the parts you could carry, accept the pieces that were not yours to lift, and bind the rest with the unglamorous knot of living? I will tell you that when the sun finally sliced a thin line across the rug in the hallway that morning, the house had already decided to stand. The blue halo went dark. A bird tapped the window and then flew. The porch wing drifted a half-inch back to the center, as though a body had left it a long time ago and it was still trying to remember how to be still.